All right, we've just been listening to Alex Murdaugh testifying in his own defense in the double murder trial of his wife and son. It's been a long stretch of testimony as he described what the family did earlier that day, what he did with his wife and son that night, and where he was at the time of their murders. I want to bring in host of Law and Crime Network, our ABC News contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, for more on this. Brian, there's a lot to unpack here, but the defense went straight to it right from the very beginning, asking Alex Murdaugh, did you shoot your wife or son? And Alex Murdaugh explicitly saying, no, he did not, right off the top several times.
Yeah, I think it was very powerful to start off that way so that the jury can get, what was the first thing he told us? I didn't do this. But I also looked at what they said afterwards through the line of questioning and Alex's responses, and that was as to why he wasn't telling the truth. It told me two things. One, when they talk about the paranoia and the way that he perceived the world around him because of his opioid abuse, it told me that they were trying to clear up why these lies occurred. It wasn't him hiding something, but it was his substance abuse. And the other thing it told me is that we're probably going to hear from another witness, probably from a medical expert of some sort, and say, this is what opioids do. Now, I can tell you as a former public defender, I've had clients who are either dope sick, they frequently use, or they may have just used before they got arrested, and I see them. And that's the experience that I get. I'm their defense attorney, that they don't know who I am. They're paranoid. Should I be telling this person who's saying, hey, trust me, I'm going to go represent you in a few moments, what happened? And there is a sense of paranoia from people who have and use opioids and abuse it. And so I think that rang true to some degree.
The lie that they seem focused on is Alex having told investigators that he wasn't at the kennels that night, when he's now saying that he was there earlier with Maggie and Paul, but wasn't there at the time that they were shot. But he said, and once I started lying, I then had to keep lying. Are there other lies that you think are going to come out?
So I think they've got the major ones that start off as the kennel video. They had to get in front of that because they knew that the cross-examination of Alex Murdaugh, which will probably come maybe later today, most likely tomorrow, let's get ahead of the lies. The other lies I think we're going to hear about, and he's already kind of cleared some of them up, is he touched both bodies. There's no blood on him in any way, shape, or form that they see. I think they should have done a better job of explaining that. It's not really a lie, but it's more what happened throughout the trial and inconsistency that the prosecution will jump on. There's also going to be the lies of in the car where he said he was during that interview. I suspect the prosecution is going to play that entire video and say, why were you lying here? Why were you lying there? I don't know if they're going to go through each and every lie in the direct, but I think that blanket statement of, I was on opioids, they give me paranoia, I think that's going to keep coming back during the cross-examination. It just depends on which ones they're going to bring up on cross.
The opioids also came into play when they asked about Alex Murdaugh changing his clothes, because the clothes he was wearing earlier in the day with his son Paul when they were traveling the grounds of the property is different than the clothes that we see on the 911, not see on the 911 call, but that we see on the police dash cam video and the police body cam video when the officers arrive at the scene. He says he came in and he took a shower and he changed his clothes because he was sweaty and it was hot out, but he makes a point to say, you know, I was on opioids at the time and they make me sweat more. Why do you think that was such an important fact to throw in?
So a big thing in the prosecution's case is this changing of the clothes, the TikTok video, the clothes that he was wearing when the officers got there. For the prosecution, this is evidence of consciousness of guilt, that maybe he had blood on his clothes, he had to discard them because of how close the shot was. We heard that earlier in the case, how close the shot was, that blood must have spattered on top of him. Now we get this benign explanation. Now, whether you believe Alex or not, this provides a reasonable, non-criminal explanation for what he did. And so that's what the defense is doing. They're providing reasonable doubt to the circumstantial evidence, so to speak, that the prosecution is putting forward in the other evidence as to this is why he changed clothes. The only reason why he did it was because he's a murderer and he's hiding evidence. Now we have, hey, I'm a large guy. I'm 6'4". I'm 220 plus. I'm on opioids. I'm sweating. I wash myself frequently because of it. Here's a non-criminal explanation. And if that is reasonable and it creates doubt, it goes right against the prosecution's case here.
Brendan, they then had him lay out not only how he spent the day with his son Paul, and who he says was a delight, and you couldn't be with Paul without having a good time. He describes loving spending time with his son. He says his wife and his son then had dinner. He talks about sitting on the couch, some sat at the table, the TV was on, that they had this sort of informal style of eating. And then he says that Maggie had asked him to go to the kennels, and he didn't want to because he had just showered, and the kennels were kind of chaotic. And so he stayed while his wife and son went, but then he changed his mind, as he says he often does when Maggie had asked him to do something he didn't want to do, and he goes to the kennel. And then he describes this whole scenario of the dog with a chicken in its mouth. It felt a little inside baseball, a little in the weeds as you're listening to this long, drawn-out testimony. Why is the defense going through this in such detail?
I don't understand why they did it at such length. I would have maybe cut that back by 25, maybe 50%. But the one thing that we don't have as an advantage to people who are outside the courtroom, maybe the defense is looking at the jury, and we'll probably hear it when we have correspondents come out and tell us what the jury was doing. But if the jury is sitting at the edge of their seat, just hanging off of every word, this is their ability to humanize Alex Murdaugh. And if you can humanize him and the jury is paying attention, you keep pouring it on and on and on. Also, there are plenty of spouses, both probably husbands and wives, in that jury, and they can probably relate to that. Hey, I just came home from a long day. I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. I just got cleaned, and here my spouse is wanting me to do this, but you know what? I love them. I'll do it. If you can create a greater connection between your client and that of the jury, you're probably half, if not more than that, on your way to a verdict that's beneficial to you and your client.
So, Brian, he says after spending a short time at the kennel with his wife, with Maggie, with Paul, helping the dog get the chicken out of its mouth and so on, that he then went back, laid on the couch for a minute, and then decided he's going to go visit his mother. And he says he went ahead and did that, but not only does he say that Maggie didn't come with him to visit his mom, but he says she was never planning on visiting his mother and that she didn't really like visiting his mom. She was sick at that point. She gets very agitated, and she's not the person that she used to be. But this is a direct contradiction to what we heard in testimony from Maggie's sister earlier, who said the only reason Maggie was there was because Paul had asked her to come so that they could visit his mother together. How difficult is that going to be to square for the defense?
I'm not sure if it's that difficult, because what we say as defense attorneys, I don't have to be right. I don't have to give the best answer. Many people think, well, if the prosecution said X and the defense said Y, do I have to compare them to see which one makes the most sense and which one's better? No. If the defense can come up on summation and say, guys, it's not my job to give you a better version than the prosecution. It's my job to, one, put on my client, which they did in this situation. It's not always their job, but they chose to do it, and let him tell his truth. And if his truth raises reasonable doubt, then that's a not guilty verdict. So putting forward these two different versions and kind of positioning them in that way can actually be very advantageous to the defense, because what Alex Murdaugh said makes sense. Like, you don't probably want to go see your mother-in-law in a difficult position like that. It's probably very hard for you, but you also know that Maggie very much loved this property, wanted to be there. She loved the animals in the property. So again, Alex's story makes sense, and if it does, maybe the testimony that the prosecution put forward is incorrect, and if that's true, that's possibly reasonable doubt.
Brian, why the specificity on the description of the property of his parents' house, where exactly he parked his car, where the carport is, where the car park is, the satellite dish? This isn't the first time we've heard them go into such detail about that property. Is there more coming about that on cross-examination?
I'm not sure exactly about cross-examination. I think if the prosecution gets into that, they're really getting into the weeds. For a closing argument, you can only argue the evidence that came into the trial. And so what I think it would be is this is the building blocks that the defense wants to argue come summation or closing arguments. They probably didn't like the version of where vehicles were parked, what Alec typically does when he arrives, what he would have or would not have seen when he pulled up. So they needed him to testify to a version that they can use on summation. Now, each party has their own version that they can argue. They can say, hey, this is how it worked. this is what my client, Alex Murdaugh, said. This is how things went about. And the prosecution can go up and say, no, this witness testified to this. This is how it would have went about. Believe me. And instead of fighting over this come cross-examination, I think the battle is best won and fought in summation.
Brian, he then describes leaving his mother's house after visiting for, he didn't specify the amount of time, but he said, sort of a short time. And then he says he tried to call his wife, likely he thinks more than once, and that she didn't answer. And he said that he wasn't concerned because she was with Paul, the nickname that he gave his son, Paul. It was one of a number of times that Alex Murdaugh seemed to get visibly emotional on the stand. He did also when they played the 911 call, when he described what he saw at the scene, and several other instances. How impactful is that for a jury to see someone on the stand speaking in their own defense and getting visibly emotional when talking about aspects of what happened?
Yeah, defendants are scrutinized probably more so than anyone else when they take the stand because they're considered interested witnesses. They obviously have the greatest to win or lose depending on the verdict. Juries, people who view us correspondents, hosts, anchors, we always view these people with the greatest of microscopes. Did they cry at the right time? Did the crying seem authentic? Did they stop at an appropriate time? Did they continue testifying in a way that made sense? And so I think we can all have an opinion. We can all judge and grade how he did while he cried and when he cried. But those 12 people in the jury, when they ultimately go and decide, they're going to be the ones that say, I believed him, or I didn't, and at least looking from the outside in, not knowing how the jury reacted, I think it's within the realm. I don't think I'm going to say I completely believed him. He seems so authentic, but I think it's within the realm, within the lane, however you want to put it, that was authentic, that response, those tears, those emotions were real. And that, again, I think goes right to the defense's argument of how can this father do this? How can he kill his wife and his youngest son when you saw him throughout the trial, on the stand, reacting as any other victim of the loss of a family would?
Brian, one of the last strings of evidence that the prosecution presented before resting their case was the OnStar information about Alex's car. And they focused on the fact that the car stopped at one point on the way from his parents' house back to his home. And today we heard Alex Murdaugh explaining why he says that happened. And he says that he had stopped to get his phone because his phone had fallen sort of between the console and the seat in an area of the car where you can't just reach and get it. And then the defense attorney asked him outright, during that minute or however long it was, were you disposing of murder weapons? He says no. Were you disposing of bloody clothes? He says no. How effective are they at trying to take away the doubts around what Alex Murdaugh could have been doing in that time and maybe planting some doubt of their own?
I think they're being extremely productive and also effective in this. They know where the prosecution is going to explore in this cross-examination. They're going to try to get ahead of it as best as possible. So here you have the example you just gave. All right, you stopped. The prosecution is going to make this seem like some sort of nefarious thing that you did, that you were just tossing evidence left, right, and center out of the car. The one good point, and probably maybe great point for the defense is, well, prosecution, did you do an investigation on an area and find anything? We know the answer to be no. But without an explanation from Alex, we can only infer the worst because that's the only information the prosecution has given us. Now, like you said in your question, like when the phone falls and it's in a place you can't get, anyone who drives and has a phone universally understands that an item like a phone or a wallet or something that you have that you're just laying on the center console may drop, and you pull over to go and find it. And I think that's something the jury will relate to and say, well, that makes sense. That would have happened. It's happened to me, so why couldn't it have happened to him? And if they didn't find any evidence of a crime in that area, they obviously would have went and checked. Then Alex's explanation must be true. And that's gaining points of credibility. That's gaining points of kind of pulling away from the prosecution's case and their cross-examination. And I think it was very effective.
There's so much more left in this testimony, so much more left for us to unpack.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.